slightly alter pulse.
The idea is that there's a fundamental pulse to the music that needs to be preserved, but around which the musician can play. It's kind of like a fish swimming downstream, but occasionally jumping out of the water, momentarily gaining separation from the flow.
Let me try and give an example from the C minor Bach partita. All right, see, so very subtly, I'm stretching out the pulse between eighth notes once in a while, but in the bigger, longer line, I'm doing nothing to alter the pulse. I'm just letting it ebb and flow a little bit, breathe a little bit.
Pianist Simona Dinnerstein also thinks about timing in Bach in terms of breath.
The problem with Bach's music is that it can start to get into a groove, and then everything gets kind of flattened in the music. It's almost like there's a click track going on all the time of these quarter notes. If you're having a click track, there's no way that you can have this kind of room for breathing.
This is Dinnerstein playing from Bach's D minor concerto.
It's not so far from feeling the beats, but I'm sometimes feeling a little bit on the front of the beat and sometimes a little bit on the back of the beat, and I'm thinking about getting away from the beats all the time.
Both Dinnerstein and McDermott are taking tiny amounts of time around the beat while still keeping the overall pulse. And there's an argument to be made that this actually enhances our perception of the beat in the music.
Ideally, what we have is an inevitability about the pulse. But that people aren't aware that the pulse is so strong. And that comes very much of having this baseline pulse that is unchangeable, and within that, variety.
One of the things I like to recall is that the columns of the Greek temples were always admired for their evenness.
That's pianist and Juilliard professor Jerome Lowenthal. Here he's talking about a passage in a Schubert impromptu.
And then when they were measured, it was discovered that they weren't even, that they swelled slightly in the middle. And it's the same with playing. We never won. That's typewriter evenness.
I love the idea that there's a kind of deception involved in the evenness of Greek pillars. A recognition that what we're looking for in a symmetrical pillar isn't actually perfect uniformity. The artist adds asymmetry to enhance the experience of uniformity. So far, we've seen one kind of rubato, what maybe we can call the Greek pillar rubato, maintaining evenness of the beat while taking the tiniest breaths to add life to the music. A closely related concept of rubato expands the metaphor from breath to song. As an example of how the same performers employ multiple ideas of rubato, here's Simona Dinnerstein using singing to describe her approach to a passage in Bach.
Bach was really, in many ways, a composer for the voice. I always think about how would I sing something, and if you're singing an octave jump, you need a moment to do that. If you were going to sing, you wouldn't sing ba-boom. It'd be so hard to do that. So I'd like to hear reaching for that octave.
Listen for the reach. Here. The analogy to song gets even stronger when you arrive at the music of Mozart and Chopin. two composers whose writing for the keyboard was deeply inspired by their love of opera and the interplay between a soloist and their accompaniment. Here's pianist Frederick Chu talking about how Mozart and Chopin thought of rubato on the keyboard.
Mozart said rubato was the left hand is steady and the melody plays around. Chopin said the same thing.
For Chu, the challenge and the pleasure of Chopin is in articulating both melody and accompaniment as independent players in an ensemble. Chu demonstrates his point with a melody Chopin himself thought was the most beautiful he ever composed, from his E major etude.
A few key moments of independence of timing between the melody and the accompaniment will make it very clear to the audience, hey, these are two different individuals marching to two different drums. There's very detailed phrasing of the melody, and it does not apply to the accompaniment, which is this perpetual rocking motion. Whereas the melody has this kind of phrasing.
The beauty of this analogy to a free singer and motoric accompaniment is that it highlights the role of the piano as the ultimate imitative instrument. As many pianists point out, accomplishing this kind of rubato on the piano is difficult, but finding it among pop singers is easy. This is Garrick Olson.
If you listen to Judy Garland, you'll hear that, or Barbra Streisand, or any number of people who have a backup band, and the singer can wander in and out.
Let's hear some Barbra Streisand.
Soft as an easy chair.
Barbra Streisand or Frank Sinatra, they're like on and off the beat. They're a little bit before the beat, a little bit after the beat. They're in the pocket. You know, all these things that pop singers do used to be done in classical music.
Here's an example from Frank Sinatra. I think you'll recognize it.
Fly me to the moon, let me...
Listen to how the band stays on beat, and Sinatra meanders around it.
Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars.
To use a different analogy, it's like the band is the anchor, and Sinatra's the boat floating in circles above it.
In other words, I love you.
According to Anne-Marie McDermott, the jazz pianist Art Tatum also could accomplish this sort of independence of melody and accompaniment purely on the piano.
One of my great pianistic idols is Art Tatum. You know, when you listen to what he's laying down with his left hand, and you're having this stride bass going on in the left hand, and the freedom of the right hand, I mean, us classical players could learn a ton from listening to that, right?
What would this kind of rubato, where the accompaniment remains strictly in time while the melody's free, sound like in Chopin? Compare what we've heard in Streisand, Sinatra, and Tatum to this Chopin Waltz, performed by Ignatz Friedman, a turn-of-the-century Polish pianist who exemplified Chopin's notion of tempo rubato. Friedman's rubato is almost more like borrowing time than stealing it. When the melody takes time, it always gives it back. This kind of rubato was somewhat of a relic when Friedman recorded nearly a century ago. Already in Chopin's time, tastes were changing. Karl Lachmann, one of Franz Liszt's students, recalled in his diary how Liszt sat down one day at the piano and began playing Chopin's Andante Spianato to illustrate how, quote, the accompaniment in the left hand should waver to follow the free expression of the melody. This is pianist Evgeniy Kissin playing Chopin in a way that might have suited Liszt, the left hand accommodating the metric fluidity of the right hand. So when Kissin starts, it's only accompaniment, and that's stable. But when the melody enters, listen to how the accompaniment starts to accommodate it. What's interesting is how pianists justify a flexible accompaniment with the very same metaphor of singer and accompanist that motivated a strict accompaniment. This is Buchner again.
Any pianist who endeavors to accompany a singer finds very, very quickly that they have to learn how to accompany means how to stretch, how to mold things together. I guarantee you that any accompanist you hire who plays for you is not going to be worth whatever it is that they're charging you. If the right is going to have the freedom of the voice, and be expressive, then the left hand has to be prepared to go along for the ride.
As we saw with Liszt, pianists started to think of rubato more flexibly as romantic sensibilities evolved in the 19th century. This is Seymour Bernstein, talking about Brahms's rubatos.
He would linger on a note or a group of notes as though he couldn't tear himself away from their beauty. And then he would never be so foolish as to make up the bar into a metronomic bar.
It was this kind of rubato that grew in favor and came to dominate classical piano playing.
I have always told my pupils, when they came to a rubato, rob Peter, but don't pay Paul.
To draw from Bernstein's last comment, the rubato that emerged in the Romantic era and that has come to dominate today is a more selfish rubato. It's a rubato that steals time and doesn't pay it back. And this makes sense from a historical perspective. It was in the Romantic era, across art forms, that we saw a human emotional and psychological experience placed at the center of art, perhaps in part due to the novel threat of industrialization on humans' pace of life and their place in the world. To this day, it's very common to hear musicians talk about rubato in terms of distinguishing one's humanity.
We're human, we're not machines. And we need to breathe in between sentences. It's just like when we're speaking, right?
We exist in what I call human time.
That's pianist Rebecca Pennies.
The metronome was primarily invented as a guide to help people that couldn't feel a pulse, not that we practice with it so that we become, again, more mechanical.
Or a more extreme statement from Fabio Bedini, talking about playing Bach.
Computer would play like this. Suppose you write in the computer rubato, the computer will play. And it's going to be unhuman. We need to understand if music is a human thing. Is it worth it to make music without exposing your humanity?
What kind of playing can most expose our humanity? Some would say that the answer is music that embodies language, an intellectual ability that no other species possesses in the same way that we do. This is Jerome Lowenthal playing Schubert.
Now, I took a little time there. Is that permissible? I think so. Music is speech. Of course, every style is different, and every music is different. But natural rubato, that means that we play music as we speak, moving forward, moving back.
Even when you have a conversation with someone, sometimes you'll get fast, sometimes you'll talk slower, depending on what it is that you want to say.
This is Simona Dinnerstein.
If you're saying something that you want somebody to pay particular attention to, oftentimes you slow down when you're saying those words. When you're saying things that everybody knows, you tend to speed up. I think music is very similar.
Few pianists played music in a way that resembles speech, more than the French pianist Alfred Cortot. who, incidentally, taught Jerome Lowenthal in Paris in the 1950s. This is back to his version of Chopin's Third Ballade.
I remember hearing Cortot play the opening of the Third Ballade and just being totally mystified. Like, what is this? What's actually going on here?
That's pianist Andrew Tyson, who's a great admirer of Cortot.
Cortot himself described his timing and his general approach to rubato as trying to find a way of playing that was spoken, as opposed to merely played or sung. This means a sort of reversal of the rubato that we're often accustomed to. Most people, when they think of rubato, they think of as sort of a slight slowing down of the tempo at the end of a phrase. But for Cortot, it's usually the opposite. The slowness happens in the beginning, and then he'll speed up.
To get a better sense of what Tyson's talking about, let's look at another example from Schumann with the apt title Der Dichter spricht, or The Poet Speaks. This is Cortot.
What's notable, I think, about the way that he plays this, just purely from a timing perspective, is the way that he plays the little four-note turn in the third bar.
Here's the turn.
But there is something sort of rhetorical about it. You know, it's very emphatic, the way that he takes time at the beginning.
So now we've explored rubato as a metaphor for breath, for voice, and finally for speech. The question we haven't asked is why pianists care so much about rubato. What's the end goal? And this brings us to a final, deeper metaphor.
More than the word rubato, I would use the word freedom.
The idea of rubato as freedom speaks to the fact that the piano as an instrument is constrained. It's a machine. It can do some things, but can't do others. You press a key, the key engages the hammer hits a string, and that's it.
And one of the strange things about pianos, it's a box of decrescendos. Any note of the piano only gets softer.
And this is something as a pianist which is so frustrating, is that, you know, once you play something, obviously you can't control the sound anymore. It's done.
We deal basically in two dimensions. We deal in the dimension of dynamics, which is loud and soft and everything in between. And we deal in the dimension of time.
And time, it turns out, is the only dimension over which we have total control while we're at the piano. There's a sort of irony to it. In everyday life, we have no control over time. It's inexorable, a force beyond intervention. And yet, at the piano, we can control it like a paintbrush. What's so interesting, though, is that different pianists have very different answers to what we're freeing ourselves from when we keep and bend time. On one end of the spectrum, we have Cortot, who, with his speech-like playing, could pause time. On the other end, we have pianists like Joseph Hoffmann, whose concept of timing is completely different than Cortot's. This is Hoffmann playing Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto. Where's the freedom in Hoffmann's playing? Perhaps it's not a freedom from time, so much as from human experience, a reaction to the claustrophobia of a human-centered world.
You listen to Hoffmann and it's just like drinking crystalline, sparkling water from a mountain spring or something. It's just such a revelation because he almost takes no rubato at all.
You get something similar with the playing of Glenn Gould, an iconoclast who tried to reduce the role of the human individual in music. One way he did that was by adhering to a strict sense of time. This is Gould talking about performing Beethoven's piano concertos.
There is a tradition among pianists that one can apply to the instruments a degree of tenuto, a degree of rubato, a degree of changingness of rhythm. And this, I think, has come about perhaps because we have exaggerated the
sense of the protagonist role in the concerto. We exaggerate the sense of dualism as between orchestra and soloist, as between individual and mass.
Gould's strategy for reducing the individuality present in a classical concerto, and in sonata form in general, was to unify the tempi around a single, unwavering pulse. By imposing this constraint, he left no room to assert his own subjective feelings about the music through expressive timing.
The greater your discipline, the greater freedom that you have with that.
That's Anne-Marie McDermott, articulating the sort of paradox that freedom can be found within order. It's a reductive aesthetic that looks to purify music to its pulsing essence, freed from psychological distraction.
Rubato shouldn't be about, look at me, now I'm going to take time here. Rubato should feel inevitable.
What I think Hoffman, Gould, and McDermott are all touching on is an entirely different idea of freedom that intentionally distances itself from the self-absorption of the human experience. It's a freedom in getting lost in the cosmos, like what you feel if you've ever ventured out into the wilderness. You look up at a huge redwood tree, or out across a vast mountain range, or up at the stars, and you feel small, insignificant, awed by the other life forms around you. You're free, momentarily, from the narcissism of humankind. All this is to say that when musicians make what seem like small, technical decisions about timing, they're at the same time making a claim about something much deeper, about what it means to be free, and how one achieves that through music.
I think freedom is contextual. Even though we might be taking time all over the place, it's not perceived as free.
This is Andrew Tyson. He makes the point that sometimes it's interpretations that concentrate all their time taking into one moment that more effectively convey a sense of freedom. One such interpretation is Moritz Rosenthal, playing Chopin's first prelude.
He's incredibly strict until one point in the preludes, and then he's incredibly free.
It reminds me of how when your shoulders are really tight, the thing to do to loosen them is to clench them toward your ears, really clench, get as tight as possible, and then release all the tension at once. So we've said that a musician's choices about rubato amount to claims about the meaning and practice of freedom. I want to close this episode by comparing how a number of different musicians make such claims in one piece of music, Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. Let's start with Rachmaninoff himself. The concerto opens with a sense of mystery. The first theme is developed and becomes progressively richer until we arrive at the second theme. It's here that we're going to focus, where the expressive content of the melody depends greatly on how the pianist takes time. Rachmaninoff uses an approach somewhat like we heard with Rosenthal, straightforward until a point.
There was a characteristic Rachmaninoff phrasing which had to do with the whole Rachmaninoff psyche. It was getting a hold of the phrase and moving into it, and then slowly declining to the cadence.
Here's Rock. Then we get to someone like Martha Argerich, who punctuates her phrases with momentary pauses, as if the music's heart skipped a beat.
It's incredible. It has all this kind of sensuality to it, but there's time on every phrase.
Part of Argerich's rubato is like what Seymour Bernstein told us about Brahms, lingering on certain notes as though she can't tear herself away from them. But another part of her rubato is inserting tiny pauses before high notes, imbuing those notes with an intentionality, a tenderness bordering on pain, such that the descent brings relief. Here's what I mean. Andrew Tyson's approach combines elements of Rachmaninoff and Argerich's rubato. You hear him getting a hold of the phrase and declining like Rachmaninoff. And at times, like Rachmaninoff, he's very straightforward. But at the next moment, he strikes a bass note and it ushers in a new sensibility, full of extra time and flexibility. As any pianist with the benefit of 100 years of recorded time to draw from, Tyson is synthesizing the lessons of the past to make his own artistic claims.
I have personally been just incredibly inspired by those old pianists in the sense that they have expanded my idea of interpretation. If you sort of look at the whole history, recorded history of piano playing, I mean, from Rosenthal to Glenn Gould and everyone in between, it's quite clear that a huge variety of approaches is possible, and we shouldn't limit ourselves to one set of conventions.
We've heard all sorts of approaches to rubato in this episode, from Dinerstein's careful play around a pulse, to Chopin's opera-inspired separation of accompaniment and melody, to Liszt's expressive ebb and flow and Cortot's phrasing in the mold of speech, to Gould's quest for inexorability. I think it's clear that there's no right answer, but it's also clear that rubato is more than a subconscious, intuitive act between a musician and his god. No, there's much more intentionality to it than that. With the tiniest decisions, musicians contribute to the enormous ongoing quest to determine what it means to be human, and with rubato, what it means to be free. And it's with that in mind that I want to play one final interpretation of the Rachmaninoff. It's 1958 in Moscow, and a lanky Juilliard grad from Texas sits down to perform in the final round of the inaugural Tchaikovsky competition. It's the height of the Cold War, a contest, if you will, between competing notions of freedom. But for one remarkable moment, the conflict is paused, and the two rival superpowers put aside their differences and they came together to celebrate one extraordinary performance. Here's the American pianist, Van Cliburn, on his way to gold in a performance of Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto in Moscow. This is how Cliburn stole a moment in time. Thanks for listening. In this episode, you heard excerpts from many lessons available at tonebase.co, including with Emmanuel Axe, Seymour Bernstein, Rebecca Pennies, Garrick Olson, Leon Fleischer, Anne-Marie McDermott, Simona Dinnerstein, Gwendolyn Mock, Jerome Lowenthal, Andrew Tyson, Fabio Bedini, Frederick Chu, and Sarah Davis Buchner. Whew, that's a lot. Join us next time as we turn to the music of Debussy and Ravel, two French composers who, in their own distinct ways, altered the course of music history and revolutionized piano playing at the turn of the 20th century.
I didn't have technique. Hi everyone, my name is Brett and this is Eddie. We're both violinists, as you can see. Now for everyone watching online, just so you guys know, we have 18 fantastic musicians, right? You guys all play violin, viola and cello. Can we have a raise of hands of all violinists here? Okay, you guys can all see that. Nice. Violists. They heard viola, that's why. Yeah, cello. Wow, we have one cellist here. Okay, the rules today is going to be 3 rounds. Whoops. So the first round we'll play one piece, maybe about 30 seconds. And once that round is over, we want all of you to vote who you think is the better violinist. And then we'll ask some of you why you think Eddie or myself, Brett, is the better violinist for each round. Alright, this is the first round. Who's ready? Okay, here we go. I'm not ready. Who plays first? Scissors, paper, rock. Scissors, paper, rock. Scissors, paper, rock. You can play first. I'll play first. I'll play you the opening of the Boccherini Minuet. That's the first one. I'm going to be playing a little bit of Bach Sonata in G minor. Raise your hands if you think I played better this time. Oh, no. Yes. Yes. Nice. And then what about Eddie? Yeah. Oh no! Let's go. Oh, okay. How come?
Eddie had good dynamics.
Good dynamics. Thank you so much. I've been practicing a lot.
He changes his strings a lot. It's like cross strings a lot. You play 2 strings at once.
Chords and double stops. They're actually quite hard. Yeah. Like that, right? Okay, so that was why you guys think Eddie's better. What about me? Okay, here we go.
You didn't move a lot.
I didn't move.
I couldn't really feel the movement in your beats. There was no movement.
There's no movement. Oh wow, that's a lot of feedback on your movement. Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's good. Now you got to move more for the next round. The second round. I don't know why I'm so nervous playing for you guys. It's like 18 judges on an audition. For the second round, I think we'll both try to play something a bit more fast and tricky. I'm a bit nervous. I haven't practiced this for a while, but shall I go first? Yeah, you can go. Go first. I'll try to play some Sibelius. had really good feedback from the last round. I'm going to listen to all your feedback. I might need a bit more space. Yeah.
So you can move.
Yes, I can move. Right. You guys asked for it. Oh, yeah, I'm playing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, third movement. Okay. In a very different style. For those of you who thought Eddie played better, please vote.
Yes, I got one. Let's go.
For those of you who thought Brett played better, please vote. Yay! See, I'm a good student. I listen to
the
feedback. Why do you guys think Brett played better this time?
I think he played better too.
Okay, do you want to?
I think he played better because he had lots of technique in the song.
Do you think I didn't have technique? That's true. I was a little bit out of tune.
It sounded like he was telling a story.
Oh. No, I agree though. It was very interesting playing, right?
Yeah, it has like a scary, spooky.
Yes, it's a bit chaotic.
Brett had really good spiccato, and his pizzicato was like really perfect.
Thank you.
Oh wow.
Brett had a lot of changing of strings, and that fascinated me and made me want to vote more for him.
He changes strings really fast, and also you sound like a shark, like duh.
I feel like he was moving his fingers a bit faster and getting all the notes correct.
He was dancing with the music while he was playing with it.
I liked how he used a lot of his bowing.
Is there any feedback for me?
I liked how you used a lot of vibrato, staccato, and you used very, very, very high notes that I ever heard in my whole life.
Oh wow, thank you.
You slowed it down when you missed a few notes, so when you missed them.
Yes, that's very perceptive. It's because I should have practiced more.
Your dynamics went down a bit, and I couldn't really tell the difference between which area was loud and which was soft. I liked the bit when you started to like do the beat with your foot in the music. And you did a retake. It made like a squeaky sound on the start.
Oh man, I need to practice my retakes.
Well, you guys are spot on. Oh, what do I play? I was going to play Bach, but I feel like Bach is a double-edged sword.